They say Hollywood is a city of dreams, a place where spotlights can turn nobodies into icons, and where love stories are sold like million-dollar scripts. I used to believe that. I thought I was living proof of it. The night I married Damien Rockwell, the cameras flashed so brightly I could hardly see the altar. People whispered that I had it all: beauty, wealth, power, and the kind of husband other women fantasized about. Beside me, my best friend since childhood was also glowing in her own white gown, becoming the wife of Damien's younger brother Ethan, the media darling, America's newest obsession. The headlines the next morning were mercilessly flattering. The Rockwell brides, queens of a new dynasty. Socialites raised their glasses, paparazzi shoved lenses in our faces, and for a brief moment, I believed every lie they printed. We thought we had stepped into a fairy tale, that the two of us had secured not only love, but power. The world saw us as the chosen ones. But behind the veil of champagne toasts and diamond rings was something much colder. The Rockwell brothers weren't fairy tale princes, they were predators dressed in tuxedos. The love that looked so perfect on glossy magazine covers was already cracking beneath the surface. I remember looking across the ballroom that night, catching my friend's eye. She smiled like she was the happiest woman alive. And I smiled back, hiding the knot of unease twisting in my stomach. Something about Damien's touch, so polished, so rehearsed, felt less like affection and more like possession. Still, I told myself the same thing she did. This is what we've waited for. This is what every girl dreams of. Two best friends, marrying into the same powerful family, destined to rule the city together. It sounded too perfect to be true. And it was. Because what no one tells you is that Hollywood fairy tales are just scripts. And every script has its plot twists. I didn't know it yet, but the night of my wedding was the last night I would ever believe in happily ever after. And to understand how it all collapsed, you need to know who I was. Before the empire. Before the cameras, before the Rockwell name chained itself to mine. Before my life became a headline, I was just a girl who believed in winning. I grew up in Los Angeles, the youngest child in a family that treated me like a jewel. My father built his fortune in real estate. My mother carried herself like old money royalty. And I was the daughter who could do no wrong. The one who was told she was destined for more. At college, I met Damien Rockwell. He wasn't just a name back then, he was a force. We studied business together, and every semester turned into a battlefield. He beat me in finance, I crushed him in strategy. Professors called us rivals, classmates called us inevitable. Rivalry turned to late nights in the library, then to long conversations about futures bigger than the world around us. Somewhere, between the textbooks and the coffee cups, we fell in love. Or at least I thought we did. By the time graduation came, people called us a power couple before either of us had real power. Damien proposed with the kind of diamond that blinds, and I said yes without hesitation. To everyone watching, it was a love story too polished to ever crack. And then there was my best friend, my sister in everything but blood. She had her own epic story with Ethan. Their history stretched further back, to high school. One night, when Ethan was cornered by a gang outside a club, she had thrown herself in front of a knife meant for him. She still carries the scar. To Ethan, she was the girl who saved his life. To her, he was the boy she was willing to bleed for. Everyone swore they were soulmates, and for a time, they looked the part. Looking back, maybe that was the problem. We believed too deeply in the stories people told about us. We thought love was a script that once written could never change. We thought friendship, loyalty, and marriage were shields strong enough to protect us from envy and betrayal. But the truth is, every empire begins to crack from the inside. And ours was already crumbling, long before we saw it. Because the spotlight doesn't just reveal beauty, it exposes the shadows. And soon, those shadows would come for us. At first, the fractures were small, easy to ignore if I kept my eyes closed. Damien worked late, nights blurred into mornings, and his excuses were rehearsed so perfectly they sounded like gospel. Meetings ran over, investors flew in. It's just business, you know that. But business started to smell like perfume I didn't own, and late-night strategy sessions came with lipstick stains that didn't belong to me. For Ethan, it was different. He thrived on attention, on flashing smiles for the cameras and hosting after-parties that ended long past dawn. Rumors followed him like shadows, models slipping out of his penthouse, influencers bragging in whispers about invitations to his private events. My best friend laughed them off at first, convinced that scars on her skin bound his loyalty. But scars don't chain a man who craves applause. I remember one afternoon walking into Rockwell Enterprises. I wanted to surprise Damien, bring him lunch the way I used to back in college. Instead, I was stopped in the lobby by his assistant, a woman with a polished grin sharp enough to cut glass. She looked me up and down and said, "Mr. Rockwell made it clear. You don't belong here. This company isn't your playground." The humiliation burned hotter than anger. Security guards pretended not to notice. Employees looked away. It wasn't just her words. It was Damien's silence that echoed louder. He never called to apologize. He never even acknowledged it. My friend had her own moment not long after. She went to see Ethan at a studio only to be blocked by one of his models. The girl tossed her hair and sneered, "Ethan made me. He built me into a star. And you? You're just his past. You should be grateful to stand in his shadow." We compared notes that evening, sitting in my living room with wine glasses trembling in our hands. Different men, same betrayal. Different insults, same silence from the ones we loved. The magazines still printed glossy spreads of us smiling at charity galas, hands tucked neatly into theirs, pearls on our necks, and diamonds on our fingers. The world saw fairy tales. But behind those staged photographs were women being erased, one headline at a time. I started noticing more. Damien's phone flipped, face down whenever I entered a room. He lingered in whispered conversations that ended the moment I approached. His laughter, once reserved for me, now rang out for someone else. And Ethan? He grew colder by the day, as if the scar on my friend's arm was nothing but an old story he'd already forgotten. It wasn't just suspicion anymore, it was proof. Proof we were outsiders in our own marriages. Proof the Rockwell name gave us diamonds but stripped us of dignity. I wanted to believe there was still a chance. That if I confronted Damien, he'd explain, he'd fight for me, he'd prove the rumors wrong. But deep down, I knew. The cracks weren't cracks anymore. They were fault lines waiting to shatter everything. And when the shattering came, it wouldn't be quiet. The night we decided to leave wasn't planned. It happened in the quiet aftermath of yet another humiliation. My best friend showed up at my penthouse with mascara streaked down her cheeks, her voice trembling as she told me what Ethan had done, how he stood by and let a model call her replaceable, how his silence cut deeper than the words themselves. I poured her a glass of wine, but my own hands were shaking. Earlier that day, Damien had brushed past me in the hallway as if I were a stranger, his phone buzzing in his hand, a smile flashing at someone on the other end. He didn't notice the way I stopped breathing. Or maybe he did, and that was the cruelty of it. We sat there, two women who once thought we were untouchable, staring at each other across the glass table. The air was heavy, the silence louder than any sobs. Then, almost at the same time, we said it. "I want out." The words hung between us like a lifeline and a death sentence. For a long time, neither of us moved, neither of us dared to breathe, as if speaking it aloud had cracked open something sacred. But then her lips curved into the faintest, bitterest smile. "If you do it, I do it too." And just like that, a pact was sealed. Not with rings, not with signatures, but with exhaustion. The rest of the night, we planned like fugitives. I called a lawyer I trusted from my father's circle, speaking in whispers as though the walls themselves might betray me. She began drafting the papers before sunrise. My friend booked us flights to Europe under aliases. We decided to leave everything: mansions, cars, jewelry. What we wanted couldn't be bought back. It was freedom. I kept replaying the look on Damien's face when he first slipped that diamond on my finger, how he swore I was the only woman he'd ever love. The memory felt like it belonged to another life, another woman. Maybe it did. The time dawn bled into the city. We were resolved. No more excuses, no more second chances, no more waiting for apologies that would never come. I thought walking away would break me. Instead, it felt like breathing for the first time in years. But what I didn't know was that walking away from the Rockwells wasn't going to be simple. Empires don't let go of their queens so easily, and the first strike back would come sooner and harsher than either of us imagined. It happened on a Saturday evening, at a glittering charity gala where everyone who mattered in Hollywood gathered under chandeliers and velvet drapes. On the surface, the night was perfect: red carpets, champagne towers, string quartets. But perfection is fragile. It shatters with a single touch. My best friend had already been pushed to her edge. She had endured the whispers, the headlines, the coldness in Ethan's eyes. That night, she caught sight of the same model who had mocked her before, draped in Ethan's tuxedo jacket as if she were already the woman of the house. Cameras followed their every move, and Ethan didn't flinch. He didn't step back, didn't deny it. He let the image bloom, as if humiliation was just another game for the press to consume. I stood close enough to see my friend's fingers curl into fists, her breath shallow with rage. She walked across the ballroom floor, her heels striking against marble like a countdown to war. People turned, sensing the storm. She confronted Ethan, her voice shaking, but loud enough to silence the room. "How long do you plan to keep parading her around before you tell the truth? Before you admit I'm nothing to you anymore?" For a split second, the crowd held its breath, waiting for Ethan to laugh, to pull her into his arms, to dismiss it as a misunderstanding. Instead, he raised his hand, the sound of his palm striking. Her cheek was sharper than the music that stopped mid-note. A gasp swept through the ballroom like a wave. My friend staggered, one hand pressed to her face, her eyes wide with disbelief. I froze, my body caught between fury and shock. The man she once shielded with her own body, the boy she had bled for, had now drawn his own blood in public, hers. It wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was violence. Cameras flashed, mouths whispered, but no one moved to stop him. Not Damien. Not the Rockwell relatives watching from their crystal tables. Only me. I rushed forward, pulling her back, my own voice breaking as I shouted at Ethan, but the damage had already been done. The bruise forming on her skin wasn't just his handprint, it was proof that we no longer had anything left to save. Later that night, when the ballroom was nothing but echoes in our ears, she sat beside me in silence, an ice pack pressed to her cheek. I wanted to tell her it would heal, that bruises fade. But we both knew better. What had cracked before had now broken beyond repair. We no longer spoke of if we would leave. Only when. And as I watched her reflection in the dark window, the faint outline of her scar from years ago shimmering under the moonlight, I realized something. Love stories don't end with bruises. They end with fire, and that fire was about to consume us both. The morning after the gala, silence filled. My apartment like smoke after a fire. My friend's cheek was still swollen, the bruise dark against her skin, and I couldn't erase the sound of that slap from my ears. We were done pretending. Done playing the part of obedient wives in a script we never wrote. That was the morning. My brother called. He's nothing like Damien or Ethan. No tuxedos, no magazine covers. He built his fortune in Silicon Valley, ruthless in business but soft where it mattered. He had heard whispers, seen the headlines, and now his voice on the phone was calm but unyielding. You don't walk away from men like that without protection. I'm sending you help. Don't argue. I thought he meant lawyers. I was wrong. By nightfall, they arrived. 6 men stepping out of black SUVs like they belonged to another world. Ex-military, broad-shouldered, each with the kind of presence that drew stares even in a city jaded by celebrities. My brother had handpicked them, and they were nothing like the bodyguards I'd seen trailing the Rockwell family. They weren't just security. They were charm, discipline, danger, all wrapped in suits tailored sharp enough to cut. One carried my bags without being asked. Another handed my friend a warm drink and said, "For the swelling, ginger helps." They didn't just protect us. They noticed us. The way Damien and Ethan had stopped noticing years ago. That night, for the first time in months, we slept without fear of someone barging in, without the suffocating weight of eyes that judged us. It felt strange, almost guilty, to feel safe. But safety was intoxicating. The plan was simple. Disappear before Damien and Ethan realized we were serious. My brother had arranged tickets, reservations, even new phones under new names. We would vanish from their empire like ghosts. And yet, as the hours slipped by, I caught myself watching the men my brother had sent. One of them, the youngest, smiled every time he caught me staring. Another, older, spoke little, but his presence filled every room. They were hired to shield us, but their kindness cut deeper than any diamond I'd ever worn. I realized then that leaving wasn't just about escape. It was about proving we could still be seen, still be valued, without the Rockwell name chained to us. As the plane tickets burned in my pocket and the city lights flickered outside my window, I understood that our great escape had already begun. We weren't just walking away. We were about to turn our rebellion into something the whole world would see. And soon, the entire world really would. It started as a joke. My friend, still nursing the bruise on her cheek, looked at me across a cafe table in Paris and said, "We should go live. Show them we're still standing." I laughed at first, but the idea sank in. Why not? We had been silenced in our marriages, erased from the glossy headlines. Maybe it was time to reclaim the narrative. So we opened Instagram Live on her phone, the Eiffel Tower glittering behind us, plates of pastries between us, and 6 bodyguards hovering in the background. We didn't expect anyone to care, but within minutes, thousands were watching. Comments exploded on the screen. Queens. Absolute queens. Forget the Rockwells. We stan you. Who are those men behind you? Bodyguards or models? We laughed for real that night, the kind of laugh that feels dangerous when you've been trapped too long. The world wasn't pitying us. The world was cheering. Then the chaos began. Halfway through the stream, a group of drunk tourists stumbled into the cafe. They recognized us, not as Rockwell wives, but as the women they'd seen online just moments before. Their smiles turned crude. One of them leaned too close, brushing his hand against my arm. Another muttered something filthy under his breath. I felt the sting of fear, the old instinct to shrink away, to let it slide. But this time was different. Cameras were rolling, thousands of eyes watching. I looked straight at him and said, in a voice steady enough to cut glass, "Touch me again and I'll have this sent to the American Embassy before you can finish your drink." The comments lit up. "Yes, Queen." She didn't even blink. Protect her at all costs. Our bodyguards stepped in, sharp and efficient. One twisted the man's wrist until he dropped his glass. Another moved between us and the crowd. Their presence so commanding the tourists backed away without another word. The entire thing streamed live. By the next morning, Clips of us had spread across TikTok, Twitter, YouTube. Headlines screamed, "Rockwell brides fight back abroad." Some mocked us, but most called us icons, survivors, women who refused to play silent dolls any longer. That night, as we scrolled through the flood of comments, I felt something I hadn't in years: power. Not the kind granted by a husband's name, but the kind earned when you stand your ground. But power draws attention. With every new follower, every article, every viral video, the Rockwell empire began to stir. Damien's name appeared in my missed calls. Ethan sent messages I didn't read. Their silence had once been deafening, but now their sudden desperation was louder still. I should have expected it. Men like them don't lose control without fighting to reclaim it. And when they struck back, it wasn't with words or lawsuits. It was with something far more dangerous. It was almost midnight in Rome when I felt the shift in the air. My friend. And I had been drinking too much wine, laughing too loudly, our bodyguards lingering a few tables away. For a few hours, we had forgotten the Rockwell name. Forgotten the bruises, the betrayal, the humiliation. But peace never lasts long when your enemies wear tuxedos and billion-dollar smiles. I remember stumbling on the cobblestones outside, my head spinning as one of the younger guards reached out to steady me. His hand brushed my arm, warm, steady, safe. I leaned into him without thinking, just grateful for a moment of balance. And then I heard it, the voice I knew better than my own. "If I'm not enough for you, tell me. But don't humiliate me like this." Damien was there, standing in the shadows of the alley, eyes burning, jaw tight. He looked nothing like the polished CEO on magazine covers. His tie was loose, his expression ragged, and for the first time I saw him not as a man in control, but as a man unraveling. Before I could speak, he pulled me into his chest, his grip bruising, desperate. "You think you can walk away from me? That you can disappear into the arms of some hired bodyguard?" His words were low, sharp, meant only for me. The guard froze, unsure if he should intervene, but Damien's presence swallowed the space. I tried to push him back, but he wouldn't let go. His voice cracked, softer now. "I've built empires, I've broken men, but losing you, I can't survive that. It wasn't love, not anymore. It was obsession, and obsession is far more dangerous." That night in the hotel, he wouldn't leave. He cornered me with questions, accusations, promises, each one more frantic than the last. He touched me as if he owned me, kissed me as if my refusal meant nothing. I felt torn in two. One part of me still aching for the man I once loved, the other part recoiling from the stranger he had become. When I finally pulled away, his face hardened. The softness was gone. "If I can't have you, no one will. Remember that." Those words chilled me more than the slap I'd watched Ethan deliver at the gala. Because they weren't empty. Damien was a man who kept his promises, and the very next week I would learn just how far he was willing to go to prove it. The first message came at dawn. My phone buzzed with a video call, the screen lighting up with Damien's number. But when I answered, it wasn't him speaking. The camera showed him tied to a chair, his face bloodied, his shirt torn open. Behind him, a masked man held a knife to his throat. A distorted voice filled the room. 50% of Rockwell Enterprises. Transfer the shares by midnight, or your husband won't see the sunrise. My stomach clenched. It didn't make sense. Damien had many enemies, but this wasn't just business. This was personal. Before I could respond, the man leaned into the frame. "Don't even think about calling the police. We're already inside. Your phone, one wrong move and he's dead." Then the screen went black. I sat frozen, heart hammering, trying to make sense of it. Could this be another performance? A game to drag me back under his control? the thought poisoned my mind. I replayed every word, every flicker of Damien's eyes, searching for a sign. Then I saw it. Barely a twitch of his fingers against the rope, tapping in a rhythm only I would notice. A warning. Don't trust what you see. It hit me like ice. This wasn't just a kidnapping, it was bait. Still, when the next message arrived, I had no choice. Coordinates to a warehouse outside the city. A threat to cut off one of Damien's legs if I didn't come alone. My bodyguards tried to stop, but I couldn't risk his life. Not when there was even a sliver of truth behind the fear. The warehouse reeked of gasoline and dust. I stepped inside, my phone still recording, praying someone would trace the signal. At first it was silent, too silent, until the light snapped on. And there he was, Damien again, bound and beaten, his head slumped forward. I ran to him, but before I could reach him, arms grabbed me from behind. Cold rope cut into my wrists, a gag forced between my teeth. I was dragged into a chair opposite him. That's when the truth surfaced. Damien lifted his head slowly, his eyes locking on mine. They weren't the eyes of a hostage. They were the eyes of a man terrified for someone else, because in the corner of the room, the real trap revealed itself. A second screen flickered on, showing me in a different video. Except it wasn't me. It was a perfect deepfake. My face, my voice, my body, staged in a video where I screamed Damien's name and begged for help. The kidnappers laughed. You believed this was about him? No. You were always the target. The queen is easier to capture than the king. And kings will give up everything to save her. The words sliced through me. My presence wasn't an accident. They wanted me as leverage to tear the Rockwell empire apart from the inside. Damien's silence, his obsession, his unraveling, it all led to this moment. I tried to scream through the gag, to warn him not to give in, but my voice was swallowed by the sound of boots hitting the floor. The leader of the kidnappers leaned close, his mask inches from my face. By the time the sun sets, Rockwell Enterprises will be ours. Unless you'd rather die for nothing. The knife glinted under the harsh light as he raised it to my chest. Damien surged against his restraints, roaring, but the ropes held tight. For the first time, I saw something I hadn't in years. Pure desperation in his eyes. The kind that comes only when a man realizes he might lose everything. And in that moment, I understood. This wasn't just a fight for survival. This was the war the Rockwells had been pretending didn't exist. The empire had struck. And soon, blood would decide who remained standing. The blade pressed against my chest, the sharp edge cold enough to steal my breath. The man behind the mask smiled, savoring the panic in my eyes. Damien strained against his ropes, his voice raw. Stop. Take me instead. The kidnapper laughed. That's the problem with men like you, Rockwell. You think you still control the board. But tonight, the queen decides the game. And then he drove the knife down. I braced for the burn of steel, but it never came. A different sound split the air, a grunt, a crash, the sickening thud of bodies colliding. Damien had broken, free. The rope still hung shredded from his wrists, his hands bleeding, but he didn't care. He had launched himself across the floor with a ferocity I'd never seen. The knife plunged deep, not into me, but into his palm. He caught the blade in his bare hand, the steel slicing through flesh, blood spilling hot across the concrete. With his other arm, he yanked me into his chest, shielding me like I was the only thing in the world worth saving. Pain flickered across his face, but his voice was steady, almost a growl. You don't touch her. You don't breathe near her. Chaos erupted. The warehouse filled with the sound of fists, gunmetal clattering, men shouting in panic. 2 of the guards my brother had sent must have tracked me. They stormed through the door, gunfire cracking like thunder. The kidnappers scattered, but not before one landed a blow that sent Damien staggering. I screamed against the gag until a guard ripped it free. I dropped to my knees beside Damien, pressing my hands to the gash in his palm. Blood poured through, my fingers sticky and warm, and for the first time since I had met him, I saw him trembling. "Don't leave me," he whispered, his voice breaking into pieces. "I don't care about the company, the shares, any of it. I only care about you. I never touched them, never wanted them. It's always been you, and I was too blind, too proud to prove it." Tears blurred my vision. I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to. But belief is a dangerous luxury when betrayal has already drawn blood. The police stormed in, sirens echoing, lights slicing through the dark. The kidnappers were dragged away in handcuffs, cursing as they fought. But I barely saw them. All I could see was Damien, pale and broken, still clutching me as if letting go meant death. "Don't walk away," he begged, his forehead pressed to mine. "Not after this. I'll explain everything. I'll prove it if it kills me." And in that moment, with his blood soaking my hands, I realized the truth. The Rockwell empire wasn't destroyed by strangers or rivals. It was destroyed by its own secrets, by silence, by pride, and maybe, just maybe, by love that had turned too violent to survive. Hospitals have a way of stripping everyone bare. The suits, the diamonds, the arrogance, it all dissolves under fluorescent lights and the smell of antiseptic. Damien lay in a hospital bed, his hand bandaged, his skin pale from blood loss. I sat beside him, silent, waiting for answers I wasn't. Sure, I wanted to hear. The FBI agents came first. Their questions were sharp, their folders thick. And slowly, piece by piece, the truth began to crawl out of the shadows. The model who humiliated my best friend? She wasn't just a mistress. She was bait, planted by Rockwell relatives who wanted to fracture the brothers' defenses. Ethan played along, pretending to indulge her, hoping to gather proof of the conspiracy. But the cost was cruel. Every smile he faked at her was a dagger in my friend's chest. Damien's assistant, the woman who barred me from his company offices, who whispered poison in my ear. She was worse. She wasn't just ambitious. She was a mole. A corporate spy feeding inside information to the same relatives, dismantling Rockwell Enterprises from the inside. And yet, in a twist so bitter it burned, she had actually fallen in love with Damien. Her sabotage had been tangled with obsession, a mess of betrayal and desire. I listened, numb, as the puzzle rearranged itself. The coldness, the distance, the cruel silences, it hadn't all been lies, but it hadn't all been truth either. The brothers had chosen secrecy as their shield, believing they were protecting us by keeping us in the dark. Instead, they had left us exposed, defenseless against whispers and public humiliation. When the agents left, the room was quiet again. Damien reached for my hand with his uninjured arm. His voice was hoarse, but steady. "I should have told you everything. I thought keeping you out of it would keep you safe. But I see now. It only broke us." I wanted to scream, to tell him safety built on lies isn't safety at all. But the words stuck in my throat, because the truth was, even in betrayal, even in blood, I still felt the pull of the man I once loved. I leaned back in the chair, staring at him, torn between fury and pity. The Empire's enemies had been unmasked, but what about us? What about the cracks between husband and wife, between love and pride? Those fractures were still there, raw and jagged, and soon I would have to decide whether to let them heal, or to let them consume us both. I once believed love was simple. You find the one who makes your heart race. You build a life together, and you hold on tight through every storm. But love in the Rockwell Empire was never simple. It was power. It was silence. It was survival. Sitting by Damien's hospital bed, I kept asking myself, was this the same man I had fallen for in college? The boy who debated me in classrooms, who stayed up until dawn sketching futures we swore we'd build together. Or had that boy disappeared the moment he put on a crown too heavy for anyone to carry? He looked smaller now, fragile against the white sheets, stripped of the armor that once made him untouchable. When he whispered that he loved me, I wanted to believe him. I wanted to erase every bruise, every silence, every betrayal, and pretend we were still that perfect couple everyone envied. But love comes with a price, and I wasn't sure if I was willing to pay it anymore. My best friend didn't hesitate. Ethan's betrayal had been too loud, too public, too violent. She was already gone, her divorce papers signed in ink as black as her fury. She had chosen herself over the fantasy, and for that, I envied her. But me? I was still trapped in the middle, between the man Damien was, the man he pretended to be, and the man I needed him to become. And I realized the cruelest truth of all. Sometimes love doesn't die with a bang. Sometimes it dies slowly, with every unanswered call, every hollow promise, every drop of blood spilled for the wrong reasons. The world outside would never know the full story. They would keep watching, keep speculating, turning our pain into entertainment. That's the price of being a Rockwell. That's the price of letting love and power mix until you can't tell the difference anymore. As I left the hospital that night, I told myself one thing. If I stayed, it would not be out of weakness. If I left, it would not be out of fear. Whatever choice I made, it would be mine. For the first time in years, the decision belonged to me, and that, perhaps, was the greatest rebellion of all. In the tie, and love gave me diamonds, betrayal gave me scars, but only courage gave me freedom. And maybe, just maybe, that was worth more than the Rockwell empire itself. If this story kept you on the edge, don't forget to hit that like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel for more stories that dive into the secrets, the scandals, and the shadows behind the glamour.